just go live now. And let's see how it works. Oh, lovely. Yeah. So, okay. A couple of more minutes, so we still have some time for small talk. So we are already live on YouTube, but people can listen to what we talk to, but we are still 2 minutes ahead of time, so we just have time to discuss the different backgrounds. It's always interesting to see what kind of background people choose and select. So as you can see here, everything is a green screen studio. I have a complete set with at the moment 5 screens scattered around my desk. Just one is to see what is live on YouTube. One is what is the camera recording. And then I have 2 computers. It's actually like a war zone, a cybercrime war zone that I've built up. But Michael, you also have a green screen, or is it just a Zoom background? Because it's very professional.
No, I'm sitting in front of Brandenburg Gate. Just kidding. This is the office. I could speak from the office, but since we said it's the virtual trip to Berlin, I thought I'll switch to something more administrative.
I like. Yeah. No, that's the funny thing. You never know where the other person is. So
right.
It's just yesterday I had a call with a person. I thought he's from Oxford, but actually it turned out that he's sitting in Bangalore, and that he's something like a vice minister of technology. So instead of a professor from Oxford. So, okay. So I think we slowly start. So welcome everyone. I'm very glad that we are quite a very interesting crowd, so to say, a club here. So just to let you know how it works. So we had 1 hour of networking in a virtual reality environment. And now we're using Zoom to engage with the local experts that we are meeting along our route. Also, our delegation, we're inviting other people to join our talks and presentation here in Zoom. And I would like to start with just showing a couple of pictures, as a couple of slides about the background of SILKROAD 4.0, if you don't mind. So SILKROAD 4.0 started with the question, the original question was, what can technology do? So this is when everything started, but we are now at the dawn, at the brink of a new era, where it's not so much a question, what can technology do, but what should technology do? So if you know a lot of engineers, a lot of experts, you learn that it's hardly any question of how to solve a problem. It just need to know the right persons, and this is what I started in 2016. I equipped a very old motorcycle. It was actually a sidecar, 25 years old, with a couple of partners with a couple of IoT technologies. And what we did, we then traveled around Europe for 2 months, seeing what happens to these technologies that we have implemented into this sidecar. And out of this small 2-month Euro trip, another project came up. And fortunately, with the support of a company like Honda and Machina.io, we equipped a modern motorcycle with cutting-edge technologies. And then I traveled all the way along the Silk Road from Austria, along Turkey, crossing Iran, Turkmenistan, and on all the Central Asian states up to China and then back. And for me, the interesting part was to see, for one, what happens to the technology that we were using. But the second dimension that was very interesting was to discuss with stakeholders along the route what are the different perspectives to technology, because I thought my Western European way or perception of technology is the total truth. And out of this project, the initiative of SILKROAD 4.0 was born. Our mission is to connect people, technology, and nations. So everything what we do, always it starts with people. But the core of everything is technology, emerging technologies that have the impact and the potential to change society for the next 5 to 10 years. And once you start thinking about technology and connecting people, you suddenly realize actually that this idea, this concept of a nation is just very artificial. So the more you think about it, the more you realize that actually in the cyber world, Austria is not only bordering to Germany, but is also directly next to Bangladesh, to Pakistan, to China, to all the other nations. And the concept of SILKROAD 4.0, just to make it very brief, is to have a global learning journey. So we're traveling around the world. The idea is to have every 2 to 4 weeks an event in a country that we're traveling to. And then we meet local stakeholders, local experts dedicated to special topics. And then we travel to the next destination and to the next stop. And just for the sake of completeness, the next stops after Berlin, we will travel on April 8th, we'll travel to Poland. The Czechia and Slovakia will go on the 6th of May, 2021. And that's the big announcement that I would like to do today, because with our advisory board, we were putting a lot of efforts in discussions about the upcoming route. So here you can see the rough sketch, what we want to travel for the next year. The fine planning, we're just in the process of fine tuning and fine planning everything. But the destination for now is to arrive at the Olympic Winter Games in February 2022 in Beijing. So this is the goal. And then we will time the rest of the stretch in such a way that we can make it comfortably. Having said this, is Beijing the end? Absolutely not. This is just for the next year what we plan to do. But the idea is to have a continuous traveling around the world, continuous exchange of experts, meeting local technology experts, thought leaders, but also tech-savvy non-technology experts. So that's one thing that I really want to put a lot of emphasis on, not only meeting technology experts, but I think it's very important that tech-savvy non-technology experts are brought together, because only then you can create meaningful and sustainable technological solutions. And that's why we have this connectivity platform, SILKROAD 4.0 for emerging technologies, to connect with experts. And this just brings me to the great panel that we have today. I'm very happy to welcome Michael Schumann. He's the chairman of the board of directors from the Federal Association for Economic Development and Foreign Trade. Hello, Michael.
Hello.
Then we were happy to welcome Harry Behrens. I dare to say he's something like a Mr. Blockchain of Daimler Chrysler. He's head of Daimler Mobility and a blockchain factory. And he will elaborate more about the future of mobility from Daimler Chrysler. Hello, Harry.
Yes, small correction. Daimler Chrysler is already long gone in the path of history. Doesn't exist anymore. So we've demerged quite a while ago. So it's Daimler, actually. So
thank you.
Hello, welcome.
It was there before.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Yes. And then last but not least, this big question I think many of us have in our head: what can we Europeans learn from China? Is there something we can learn from China? And I'm very happy to welcome this absolute expert, China expert, Wolfgang Hirn, who will elaborate more on what we can learn from Shenzhen in terms of e-mobility. He wrote a very interesting book about Shenzhen and the developments that are going on there, and he's also the author of a newsletter, of a regular newsletter. It's in German, and it's if you're German speaking, highly recommended. Welcome, Wolfgang. Pleasure to have you with us.
Good evening. Hello.
And also, I want to introduce you to Harvey Zodin, who will kindly support us today with the questions that you can raise. So please grab your mobile phone and make a photo of this Slido code. This is where you as an audience can raise questions. And the code is 40563 on slido.com. Or if you want to grab your mobile phone, just make a picture of this. Or modern mobile phones, typically, if they realize that's a barcode, they will directly guide you to the web page where you can ask the questions. So welcome, Harvey. Thank you also for supporting us. I hope you can hear and see us.
Absolutely. I'm just hiding here.
Hello, Harvey. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, without further ado, I know that the audience is not here for me to hear me talking. I think the whole purpose is to learn something from the local experts in our virtual trip, traveling today from Brussels to Berlin. And I would hand over the word, so to say, to Michael. So Michael, great to have you here, and we're looking forward for your elaborations.
Well, thank you very much, Philippe, and welcome everybody to Berlin, virtually at least. Dear members of the Digital Silk Road project, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, everyone following us online now on YouTube. Thank you very much for inviting me to this innovative event and to share a few thoughts with you about the future of a German key business sector, the automotive industry. Germany is, of course, world-renowned for its automotive and its automotive supply industry. But that brings me right to the center of the issue that I would like to focus on today. The perception of Germany as a leading automotive nation is based on past success. Will it be the same in 10 or 20 years from now? As BWA, the German Federal Association for Economic Development and Foreign Trade, we represent a holistic approach in which business and value creation must be oriented towards social and ecological criteria if sustainable success is to be achieved or secured. Over the past 18 years, we have been exploring these issues, hosting personalities and speakers from Nobel Prize laureate Muhammad Yunus to former US Vice President Al Gore, the German President Horst Köhler, and we introduced many impulses into the debate about the future of society and economy, which have now also reached the automotive industry. And what connects us to the Silk Road is, since BWA was founded, we involved ourselves quite a bit in Sino-German relations. And since it was first conceived in China, we have been accompanying the Belt and Road concept and its global impact on logistics and transport, including railways, shipping, and mobility. We started numerous initiatives. We set up an expert committee analyzing the developments and opportunities for our companies. It has become a little think tank. You might call it a bridge between politics, business, and science. With its contributions, it brings together scientific and entrepreneurial findings on various aspects of the Belt and Road project. And these analyses and comments are intended to contribute to a well-founded classification of the facts and encourage an independent, critical opinion-forming process. So we see ourselves as an ideologically and politically independent provider of ideas, especially for companies from Germany that would like to obtain professional information about business and trade opportunities with the countries along the new Silk Road. And I think with Dr. Mario Hausner, we have already been able to welcome an expert from your circle of the Digital Silk Road 4.0 in the form of a guest contribution recently. Well, having said that, let me get back to today's topic. I think for more than a year now, we have been witnessing how the corona pandemic and the corona crisis have been accelerating what I would call ambivalent developments in the automotive sector that were already recognizable before, but were probably not center stage on the agenda of decision makers in business and politics. From our assessment and our opinion here at BWA, I would say the comfortable times for the German automotive industry are over. Both manufacturers and suppliers are facing increasingly tough competition from Asia and the US. German suppliers in particular are at risk because the cars of the future might not need anymore many of the components they built their fortunes on in the past. Electromobility, in retrospect, we must say that, has been underestimated by German automotive brands and suppliers alike. We're quite late to the market. And perhaps now we also underestimate the automotive ambitions of the new champions of digital platform economies, of which we have none originating out of Germany or Europe for that matter. In our view, we have rested a bit too long on the successes of the past, as I mentioned at the beginning. And when it comes to the current topics of the future in the industry, Germany is losing ground and about to be left behind by competitors from abroad. Yes, in the field of autonomous driving, we are currently still relatively well positioned in terms of innovative capacity, if you go by the number of patent applications. And yes, we now do also have a national hydrogen strategy. But here as elsewhere, I assure you, we will soon begin to feel increasing pressures from most likely Asian countries as well. I'm not only talking China, but of course, China will be at the center of what you might call the new Asian century. And no other industrial sector illustrates the ambivalent relationship that we have with China, as does the German automotive industry. Without the purchases of Chinese consumers and the associated stabilization of the sales of all our well-known German automotive brands, the situation in the industry here in our country would be much worse. And the pandemic is not over yet. I think we need still to be concerned about the vulnerability of our global production chains in the automotive industry and looming production shutdowns when borders are closed and suppliers can no longer reach their destinations, or critical goods like microchips are not available in sufficient quantities. So we have a lot of reasons to be grateful to China at this moment in time on one hand, but how do we secure our position in the long run is a question on the other hand. In our opinion, in the view of the above mentioned circumstances, we need a fundamental change of course, focusing first and foremost on infrastructure and connectivity. And I think that is what we can learn both from the development and the example set by China, and also what we can learn from the priorities set in the Belt and Road project. We need in Germany considerable investment in future viability, especially in infrastructures, digital and analog, for future mobility, for autonomous driving, for electromobility, for hydrogen mobility, you name it. And not knowing what Wolfgang will later present in his speech, but if you take Shenzhen for an example, and see the infrastructure that has been created there. You see the benchmark, and if you compare the average German city, be it Berlin, Frankfurt, Hamburg, or Munich, you see the distance and the amount of catching up that we have to do. And again, having said that, when we currently look at the political discussion and a lot of the industrial debates and discussions in Germany nowadays, and we have to read that Audi, for example, is making the issue of gender mainstreaming a central topic in the group's internal and external communication these days. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for gender mainstreaming, but I seriously wonder whether the signs of the times have been recognized here. In my view, there are numerous factors of greater priority for the future of the automotive industry in Germany, some of which I have briefly outlined. So thank you for your attention. I think this could be an impulse for further discussion. I'm very much looking forward to the presentations of the other participants and to discussing with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael, very much. Very interesting presentation, very informative and thought-provoking. So you mentioned your association is 80 years old, is that right?
18. We were
18.
Founded in 2003.
Okay, I was wondering about that. So can you tell me about what was the impetus for its formation?
Well, actually, we were founded by family-owned companies, the famous German Mittelstand corporations, at a time when they were when they had realized that they needed to get better access to what at that time were called emerging markets, which was China, Russia, India, the BRICS debate, you might remember, and that alongside the official German chambers of commerce, they wanted to have a bridge that could help leverage the context, the experiences, and the networks of German entrepreneurs in those markets for other who would like to follow. That was the impetus behind, helping to get access into these markets, political flanking, government relations, but mostly like share experience and build on experience.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much. Professor Don Lewis has a lot of questions, and I'll try to ask several of them from him. So one of the things he wants to know is, do you feel that there'll be a level playing field for German business in China under the CAI, the Comprehensive Agreement for Investment with China, that was just agreed upon the end of last year, but not yet ratified by the EU. So how is that going to affect your business?
Actually, we're very much in favor of the ratification of that agreement, and we've been endorsing it all the way. We just issued a press release, calling on the European or the German members of Parliament and the European Parliament to move forward with ratification, because we believe it's the best that we can get at this moment in time. Will it bring about a complete level playing field? Probably not, but it will give European companies, I think, the best deal available. China has moved a lot. If you recall that it has been negotiated for over 7 years, and if you look at the CAI in detail, they really came forward on many issues. It's not an agreement yet, as you know. It's an agreement in principle, and if you would ask me right now, does it stand a chance to pass the European Parliament? I'm skeptical. I talked to members and the MPs that say right now it doesn't stand a chance to get ratification. So, and I think it's the best we can get, and we need to face it if we want to, secure the viability of our industrial sectors. We'd rather strike a deal with China.
Okay, very good. So today the National People's Congress adjourned after a week of deliberations. And one of the things that they discussed was the 14th five-year plan. And also in that 14th five-year plan was a lot of emphasis on the dual circulation model, the new model for relationships between China and other countries, as well as the internal dynamics. So what are the thoughts of you and your members on that?
There has been a lot of reporting on it from all different angles. Some painting it as a new, protectionist horror scenario. Other looking at it more optimistic. It's very hard to assess it at the present moment. I think it's a rational move on the Chinese side. That happens when you try to talk decoupling for quite a while, and when you add the experience of a pandemic where global supply chains break down. We're talking about similar topics when stressing the importance of resilience and opening up. Yes, you would probably have to localize more in terms of foreign companies serving that market. But it is a move probably very much triggered by the experiences of the Trump administration and the pandemic, and one has to see, how that plays out in the next years. If it very much, I think, depends on how the global geopolitical axis will keep either confronting each other or become more conciliatory. During the Biden administration, we have to see that.
Okay. So another question from Professor Lewis. How should German automotive companies, along with German government, respond to current Asian, and I'll say Chinese specifically, challenges in order to maintain their competitive edge?
Well, I think, as I tried to say in the opening statement, if you're talking governmental policies, I think it's time that Germany should look a little bit more inward, and we should focus on the strategy for upgrading our infrastructure in all respects when it comes to mobility. Number one, on investing, having a national action plan that's worth the name of investing in mobility technologies, in innovation in the automotive sector. You all recall probably the National Action Plan on Artificial Intelligence and the budget that was allocated to it, which was, I think, a fraction of the budget a city like Shenzhen spends on artificial intelligence research. So we have to create, I think, the regulatory environment and the programs and the funding to boost our industry here in Germany first and foremost. Second, of course, we should still engage with the Chinese market. I think it's competition on one hand, but there's a lot of opportunities. There's opportunities to also invest in technologies in China, to cooperate with China. We still have the advantage, I would say, of this very strong brand value and all the respect and admiration, Chinese people and consumers attribute to the German automotive industry. That is a limited window in time, and we can either seize it and seize that opportunity, or we will see it closing.
Okay. You mentioned hydrogen. So could you talk a little bit about the future of hydrogen fueling of automobiles and what the China or Asian part of that might be?
I'm not an expert in hydrogen technology, but I believe from what I read and from what I've seen, again, it comes back to infrastructure. Be it electromobility, be it hydrogen-powered mobility, or be it autonomous driving that needs to have digitally equipped road infrastructure, it all comes down to infrastructure. And I don't see, the progress needed, nor the political awareness in this country here to move that to a level anywhere near to what you see in Asian countries. And that is what concerns me most. I mean, even if you look at the electromobility field, we still don't have a viable electromobility infrastructure in Germany right now. And we've been talking about it for years and years and years. So again, maybe we hear a little bit more on hydrogen from other experts. Yeah, and you can, you have the access to Japan, you have China. There's a lot of geopolitical to that as well. Could it be a new key technology where Germany can regain leadership? I don't know. I'm not sure about that. But what I'm sure about is that if we don't do something about the infrastructure here, these are discussions that we don't need to seriously discuss about.
Mm.
Okay, and Professor Lewis had a number of questions about the environment and German industry's position on improving the climate change and so on. So what are your comments about that?
I think that awareness is there. That awareness is there, and again, that is a field of technology where we are quite advanced, where we can probably build on that, that position. Given the Green Deal the EU wants to put in place, given all the budget and funding available, the priority available, I think that is something we can capitalize on. And I believe, from what I hear, from what I see from companies, from executives talks that we have, that is really number one on people's agendas right now. So I'm more optimistic about this.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I think we can let you off the hook now. So thanks for a great presentation and for some great answers. Really appreciate it.
Enjoyed it.
Okay, let me see. Philippe, are you there?
Yes,
okay.
I am. Thank you so much. It was very interesting. Thank you for this very interesting inspirations, Michael. And thank you for the question, Harvey. Maybe because we were already directly jumping into the topic of the future of mobility. So maybe we just hand over now to Harry Behrens, who I think is fully qualified to speak about the future of mobility here, as probably one of the leading experts when it comes to the future of mobility or for the blockchain. Harry, do you want to share some thoughts about how you see the future of mobility and how it's going?
Yes, first of all, thank you to give me the opportunity to be presenting here. I hope my slides are visible. So my role today is a little bit of a maverick here. So I see very big names here from politics, etc. So I do not represent the political angle of these very important topics, but I address things more from a technologically visionary perspective, basically looking at what are the problems that we are facing and how can some of these problems be solved with technology that's emerging. And therefore, what I'd like to present today is a decentralized approach to mobility and grid balancing. And I really like the combination of the terms power and mobility. It rings nice in the ear, but it also addresses an extremely important topic, which is essentially about climate control, becoming carbon neutral. And the beauty of it is, as far as I'm concerned, as heading the blockchain factory in Daimler Mobility, formerly called Daimler Financial Services, it's one of these challenges that lends itself very well to be addressed with some of these technologies that have emerged over the last 5 years. They come from before, but they have become usable in the sense of maturity over the last 5 years. And just like Philip, when he introduced the whole Silk Road story, he started off actually by showing, by starting with a technical story. He had a bunch of IoT devices basically put them into a one platinum computer, wired it up to his motorcycle, and then through that approached and explored a big part of the world. And so I take the same approach now in addressing an important topic through a technological eyes. So when we talk about mobility, there's, roughly speaking, you can slice it and dice it in many ways. But there's an easy way to slice it. First of all, logistics versus mobility, where logistics is about transporting goods, and mobility, when we use the term, is usually about transporting people. So that's the first kind of, just to separate it a little bit in terms of scope. And then because of the nature of the assets, the vehicles, the cars that are being used, there's also a fundamental difference in mobility outside of cities and mobilities inside of cities. So urban mobility is a very much different topic than rural mobility. I will focus now on urban mobility, and there's a number of reasons for that. Maybe here, sitting in relatively comfortable Germany, we don't notice that so much, but if you go to the emerging economies, you will see an immense urbanization. So an incredible speed of people leaving the countrysides and flocking to the urban conglomerates, which get huge and very, very crowded all over the place. So the number of people in cities is increasing rapidly. The density in cities is increasing rapidly. And of course, coming with that also, because there's more people, there is more market, but also there is, unfortunately you may say, but there is also a big gap in terms of economical activity, in terms of technical activity, in what is happening in the cities versus what is happening on the countryside. So all or almost all of the technical developments that you see start and emerge in the cities. So when you talk about urban mobility, you're talking about the forward moving part of mobility. And here we see very rapid changes, because what is happening, a lot of new modes of mobility come up. There's this technical term, it's called multimodal mobility. It's a big word for, basically means the very simple fact, when I move through a city, it's not anymore that I jump into my car, I drive into the city, I park the car, I go shopping, I walk out of the shop and continue, because all of that is not feasible anymore. In many cities of the world, it's too crowded simply to do that. And in other cities of the world, it's not desirable to do so anymore because of congestion, because of our environmental concerns and whatnot. So urban mobility by nature will have to be a balanced, a sustainable form of mobility, where the appropriate mode of transports are meshed together to provide citizens with a flexible, seamless, hopefully comfortable, and hopefully affordable way of moving throughout a city. And the product that you will be offering and the product that will be consumed is not, I ride that scooter or I sit in that car. The service ultimately that we need to think about here is moving from A to B in the most appropriate way. And from an individual perspective, that could possibly mean I ride my bicycle up to the bus stop, I take a bus, I get off the bus, I jump on a scooter, I go and I hop on a train, I rent a car, I do car sharing. So all of that should be relatively seamless. But most of all, if you now look at it from the urban city planners, from the policy makers' perspective, from the perspective of those who are researching smart cities, this cannot be a free-for-all. The free-for-all don't work. I mean, there is some cities out there, most of you will have been to one of them, where the traffic is so impossible that I know cities in Asia where you sit regularly more than 2 hours to go over a distance of less than 20 kilometers. Now think about the loss of resources, the waste of time, the loss in social product, the loss of quality in life, plus the incredible environmental damage that you get by most of these transport vehicles actually being combustion-based. So that is not sustainable in any way. So if you plan a sustainable, a pleasant, and a well-balanced mobility in the future, you will have the policymakers become part of what is mobility. It will be a collaborative effort where you will have different modes, yes, some of them even autonomous or semi-autonomous, but most surely not a free-for-all, because no city in the world can afford that anymore. And we see that all over the place, from toll to basically diesel plaquette, to this plaquette, to only electric vehicles, to whatever. Already cities are waking up to the fact that we need to control how mobility is being delivered and consumed. So if you think this through, then what is the scenario that will emerge? One of the possible scenarios is you will have many, many, many different operators, 2, 3, 4 operators offering scooter, another 2, 3 offering e-bike. Then you got public transport, usually handled by one organization. But if you look at how this is structured, it's usually public-private partnerships of 10s or 20 private companies actually coming together under the overall umbrella of an organization that represents it to the outside, but actually internally these are independent companies, and. So many, many different players and many different modes of moving. But what you would want from a customer's perspective is a seamless way of consuming all of that. And what does seamless mean? That somehow I get myself a pass, and with this pass that is given to me by either the city or my provider of choice, I can now QR code identify myself there, here, and here, and just hop on, hop off on whatever mode of transport that I would like to use. And somehow the whole billing and verification and all of that should happen somewhere where it doesn't concern me, very similar to roaming in many ways. And that is how urban mobility should look from a user perspective. From a city planner's perspective, it needs to be more than that. We need congestion planning, so we need to maximize the throughput of the network, as it were, the street infrastructure. But we also need to balance it in the sense that we want to avoid environmental damage, and we want a healthy portfolio of micromobility to public transport to vehicles, and where possible, we want our vehicles being utilized by more than one person, because if you think about it, it's highly inefficient to move 2 tons of metal to just basically transport one person with an average weight of 70 kilograms in Europe. So this is basically where we're moving, and this is now, if you look at this and accept this as a valid scenario, we have technology now that is very well suited, that is emerging now to actually address this in ways that can really make breakthroughs here. So, and in addition to all of this now, which is the mobility part, there's a very important part, it is part of mobility, but we obviously don't want fuming, smoking, stinky, environment unfriendly mobility. Obviously, we all have woken up to the fact that it should be carbon neutral. Electric or hydrogen, I am not the specialist here, but it should be definitely carbon neutral, just alone for the smog in the cities. And here there's a very interesting strategy appearing now, which is crucial. And here I give credit where credit is due. This is not my quote. There is a very, very innovative company in Europe. They're called Elia. They are based out of Belgium, but they also own one of the big German grid companies, which are called 50 Hertz. And they have basically defined a strategy in a paper which can be found on the internet, accelerating to net zero, redefining energy and mobility. And in this, they are basically saying that the convergence of power and mobility, so they don't see it anymore. There is the power sector and there's the mobility sector, but they see it as the convergence of power and mobility has the potential to make the EU, and I would imagine this is applicable to any other place, to China especially, the world's first climate neutral economy. And I quote from here, this is a quote from that strategy paper: making the EU the world's first climate neutral economy will require more than just the energy transition. To cut CO2 emissions by 2050, many sectors will need to make far-reaching changes. 2 sectors that play a key role in society have the leverage needed to do this: power and mobility. So I just outlined a little bit about the mobility part, how it gets more decentralized. Now, if you add an energy network, a power grid, where you have very many renewable energy providers, that is also very decentralized. If you look at solar plants, if you look at wind plants in Germany, we have gone away from nuclear power plants. So essentially, when we say renewable energy, we mean essentially wind and sunshine, which comes completely unplanned. It comes asynchronous, and you have these there. It's produced in a very decentralized manner. And because it comes whenever it likes, you need to balance it, because a network is not a storage system. And a network takes the energy when it's created, and if there's not enough demand for it, what do you do with the energy? It's actually a problem. It's actually a very serious problem, and it's very hard and very expensive to constantly keep in shape, which is, by the way, why this company very aptly called itself 50 Hertz, because when you balance an energy grid, what you're doing is you're balancing the grid so the frequency, the ground frequency of 50 Hertz is kept. That's why the company calls itself that way. So this is now, if you look at these two, well, scenarios or problems, you have mobility, which is very, very decentralized. You have the power grid, which is becoming more and more decentralized. And most of all, in the effort to become carbon neutral, you obviously need to find a nice balance between the mobility sector and the power sector to achieve all of this reduction of CO2 which is needed. And again, I take from that paper essentially, where basically what is the connection between the power sector and the mobility sector? Well, think again, like the example, Germany is a very good example. We are one of the countries with the highest amount of renewable energy, absolutely, but also relatively, and it's going to become more. So you have, in the future, we will have almost exclusively energy coming from wind and sun. And remember, this is not like a power plant. A power plant you switch on when you need energy. When you have less demand, you switch it off. Nice and easy, at least for network planning perspective. But if you got wind and sun, well, the wind comes when the wind comes, and the sun comes when the sun shines. Now, what about the demand? The demand has its own curves, and they're not aligned. Now enter the brave new world of electric vehicles. Electric vehicles, of course, in their first instance, why we all welcome them is they reduce smog and they reduce carbon, at least in the driving perspective. So it's a wonderful story. But the first challenge from a grid perspective is most of these things get plugged in between 5 and 7 in Germany. In Germany, we go to work, we go home early. In China, it might be a little later, but you have the similar kind of block where everybody's basically arriving at home and plugs in their electric vehicle. And we're going to see very fast growing curves. So it's to be expected that we will have a very unhealthy spike of demand on electric power when all these electric vehicles get plugged in. That needs to be dealt with from an energy perspective. But on the other side, you got a huge opportunity here. Why? Because these cars have batteries. Think of them now not as a car from the energy perspective. Think of them as a rolling battery, like a buffer for electricity. So what was traditionally done in Europe is we use lakes for that. So what you do is when you have a surplus of energy, you pump water up the hill into the lake. And then when you want the energy back, you release it through basically a hydroelectric plant and then retrieve basically your water in terms of electricity. So that used to be the energy buffer system in Europe. In Central Europe, all the available lakes are taken already. There's no more lakes left that we can reasonably leverage for this. But now you hundreds of millions of vehicles that, or tens of millions to be, tens of millions of electric vehicles, which are going to come, and the curve looks like this right now. They provide an opportunity to go bidirectional here. So not only do they consume electricity, how about I can use them to store electricity in the future? So in a combination, it's called Sektorenkopplung in German, in a combination of these two sectors. And this is why the group ELIA, and I like to really quote them because they really have a very powerful strategy on this. So they have basically called it power and mobility. In the coupling of the two, now you have synergies between these two sectors where the one benefits from the other with the ultimate very desirable result of achieving carbon neutrality faster than we might have thought before. So how does this relate to the fact that I am here as the head of the Daimler Mobility blockchain factory? Because if you think about solving all of this, how would you go about in doing this? Well, there's many, many layers to that. But the basic fundamental layer is you have a lot of decentralized devices and actors. You need to have them fully identified. You need to have a very secure way of being sure that who you're dealing with is who you're dealing with. You need to be sure that the qualifications and the capabilities, the car, the battery, the charging stations, etc., bring can all be tracked. And of course, you cannot afford manual work in this. This will never work. You need this fully automated. So if you have said that, it's highly decentralized, fragmented, it's got very high demand on the security, on the transparency, on the immutability of it, and it needs to be 100% software, because only software can scale at this kind of scaling and still keep the costs to a level that we can all afford. Well, if you then do the filtering in your mind, assuming you have IT or software or technical background, you come to a very limited set of technologies that can do that. And blockchain or decentralized technologies or distributed ledger, plus something called decentralized identifiers, are uniquely well positioned to exactly solve these problems. They're almost, it would seem as if they're almost invented for this. So it's truly a mesh of demand, of need, towards a technology which has lately emerged. Because it allows decentralized integration without the overhead of intermediates in the middle. It allows, through the very secure verification of identities for legal persons, company and people, but also for devices, the battery, the charging station, the car, and it involves the full keeping track, billing records, and even accounting thereof in a fully automated manner. So this is where the future, I believe, of industrial blockchain, one of the big sectors where industrial blockchain will make a very big difference, is in the field where mobility and energy come together essentially in urban environments, in what is a very decentralized structure, which can now be addressed with this kind of software, where, by the way, the three sectors that are meeting are IoT. So back to you, Philip. Originally, you started this whole Silk Road with an IoT approach, because, of course, the devices need to be Internet of Things equipped devices. You add a secure identity and blockchain-related security to them, and then you let them transact among each other, prove to each other who is who, verify the necessary credentials, do the necessary micro-booking, and then have the whole thing globally consolidated from a bookkeeping perspective by a distributed ledger, which is a synonym for blockchain, or a very close synonym to blockchain. And technically speaking, and I will end with that, is the modules or the pillars upon which you can build this are e-contracting, we call it a mobility blockchain platform, but essentially it's a platform that handles the transactions that are being taken place here with the necessary attribute, who did what with whom, at what time, how many billable units. And the main functions of this platform are access control, verification, service roaming, so identify once and then be able to roam across this with your credentials. The smart contracting, so making sure we have the legally valid documentation in place. And then most of all, the settlement, so all of this actually gets settled. I will leave the topic tokenization out because this is maybe still immature at this point in time, but I hope I managed to give a little bit of an inkling from a technologist's eye. Obviously, I'm seeing it from a technical perspective. I presented it maybe too technically, but the topic that is being dealt with here is a topic that concerns us all, which is on the one side, urban mobility with all the congestion and all the problems that we're already facing. But now, especially with the advent of renewable energies coming together with electric vehicles, the whole issue about grid balancing, and then all of a sudden the two together open up an opportunity. So these two challenges put together become a synergy and become an opportunity, if you put the right technology to use to leverage that opportunity.
Great. Okay, thanks very, very much. It's certainly a brave new world that we've entered. So we have a couple audience questions, and I have a question to start with, and Professor Lewis has some questions too. So I've always felt that things like Internet of Things, that its Achilles heel is security. And so we've had instances recently, not in IoT, but where state actors have broken into various institutions like utilities and shut them down or made their presence known. Will this blockchain technology of which you've spoken be secure enough to absolutely prevent that?
Well, beware of anybody who promise you absolute truth or absolute security. Beware, because either they don't know what they're talking about or they're lying. So there is no such thing as absolute here. And in security, all you need to know is it better than the best security out there at this point? That is how you measure security. And definitely the technology underlying blockchain is more secure than anything else we know at this point. So that far I would go. Absolute security, I believe the human mind is ingenious enough to be able to hack anything eventually. So I have trust in the human mind in that, but we will improve. Anyway, the technology is more secure than any other we know.
Okay. I may mangle somebody's name, but Leopold Zyka, he's asking, is the blockchain based on Ethereum or something totally new, in your opinion?
It's essentially, I mean, which specific blockchain technology you use, it depends a little bit on what you're trying to do and what your requirements are. So most of what I have been describing here will usually not use the currently publicly running networks, simply because of the proof of work issues that are basically make it inefficient, but it will very often be what is called a fork of Ethereum. So you take a copy of Ethereum, make the security protocols less energy intensive, which you can afford to do if you only allow identified parties onto the network. And then I would guess right now, but this changes, 60 to 80% of any of these projects are what is called a fork of Ethereum.
Okay. And a follow-up question from him, not a follow-up, a separate question. And you spoke mostly about urban areas and the problems of congestion and so on, but Leopold's asking, how do you see rural mobility in smart villages?
Well, you have, there is a simple situation that you need for these kind of things to make sense. You need a certain amount of density. That's because only a certain amount of density brings the critical mass for all of this to make sense. You have initial outlays, you then have basically the effort of running it. So I know that this will apply to urban mobility, or I hope it can be applied to the countryside. It is difficult to do simply because the population is much scarcer. So you're dealing with a lot less people and a lot less available resources. So it becomes a very, very different ecosystem that you're basically living in. So it's very different, at least.
Okay, and a question from, I'm not sure if this man or woman, Michelle or Michele Fiorini, I can pronounce the Fiorini. Do you feel the need of mobility in future years is still constantly increasing as the last years? So I think what's being asked is what are the future trends in terms of mobility? I think you may have answered that question by saying that the congestion is getting more and more difficult. But do you have any further thoughts about that?
Yes, very much so. And it's also, I think congestion will sink, but mobility, if you measure there's a KPI here, it's person kilometer per year. So all it means is per person, how many kilometers do we travel? And that's increasing. And it's even increasing in the generation that doesn't own cars anymore. So I believe urban mobility should become more efficient. And I believe we can get orders of magnitude more person kilometer per year while still being able to avoid the problems we're facing now. Because the way we're dealing with mobility now is, if you look at it from a very high level view, is actually highly inefficient. And it can be done so much more efficient. There's orders of magnitude of efficiency to be gained here. So I would say more mobility with a lot less of the problems we're seeing now.
Okay. A question from Professor Lewis. So I'm not sure if you know the answer to this or not, because it's a little bit outside of what you talked about. How do you see your company, Daimler, is contributing to China's decarbonization plans in urban areas and otherwise under the 14th five-year plan?
That's a question above my pay grade. I'll pass on that.
Okay. And I have another question. To what extent do you and the other automobile companies talk about these kind of issues? I don't want to get into antitrust issues or anything like that, but in terms of batting ideas around them, and is there a kind of synergy within the automobile industry, would you say, in your country?
Well, you mentioned the very correct word here. You meant this is a very sensitive question even to ask. So of course, there are open forums where people from different companies are in the same forum and present. But of course, there is no direct way to answer that without going into possibly sensitive areas. So generally speaking, it's a difficult question.
Okay, yes, I know, but it's an interesting one. And
Yes.
because the issues are so great, I was just curious about.
But what you, I can answer it in one way.
Okay.
Because this is appearing. We see some of the public sector through, there's a big initiative now, which is quite well known in Germany, called Gaia X. Then there is something like also called Datenraummobilität. It's an abstract term yet, but there's some activity forming behind it. So it seems the policymakers are trying to provide a platform where this can be done. And as long as it's driven by the policymakers, that is highly welcome, because then obviously it will be in an official banner, and then it can be done for the greater good. I would expect that at least some of these exchanges happen through these kind of forums, which are provided through official policymakers' platforms.
As an American, I'm always interested in the relationship between the EU as an institution and the member states. So with regard to the issues that you've been talking about, what's the difference, or what's the kind of interactions that Daimler has on the EU level versus the German state level?
Again, so I am here, and I mentioned it originally, I am here the technical maverick, so I can present technical visions to problems of mankind. But anyway, I only work for Daimler Mobility, so not for the Daimler. So these are questions that are beyond the scope of what I would feel qualified to actually answer meaningfully.
Okay, that's fair. And what about the blockchain technology? I mean, I'm a Luddite. I know very little about it. What kinds of changes would you foresee in the future? Is what we see now is what we're always going to get, or will the blockchain technology improve or morph into something else in the future, do you think?
I have one very important point I see in this technology, and let's not talk about blockchain because it just, in some ways, it misses the point. Think about decentralized technology, and then think about platform economics as we know them, where we have seen a lot of industrial sectors being mangled by very big centralized platforms that aggregate a lot of power by operating the marketplace. So, and the network effects that this brings is highly desirable. But now, if you want to have the same thing without this control accruing to the one single company in the middle, you need something which historically is known all over the world. It's called cooperatives, Genossenschaft, savings and loans. They have always been decentralized ways of doing business where competitors or individual companies get together to build something which they all need, but which is too big for them to operate on their own and wouldn't scale alone. So the German Sparkassen, Raiffeisenbanken, Kreditreform, they're all that, the savings and loan banks, it's every country in the world has that. And if you now think about a way of approaching platforms, so you need those scaling and those network effects, but you want to keep it in a sustainable equilibrium where not all the power ends up in one hand, then a collaborative approach, a cooperative approach to platform building would be desirable. I believe it's more balanced and it's more sustainable. And if you take that approach of cooperatives in the sense of the noun, or the Genossenschaft in the sense of the German word, and you look at what it does, and you think, now let's think of this in software. Then if you think of this in software, you again come to, hey, a decentralized bit of business software is exactly a perfect match to that. So, and I believe this is where blockchain, if we still call it blockchain at that point in time, it'll probably be called something else. But these decentralized technologies, they have a big contribution to make in basically shifting the, in my opinion, unhealthy dynamics that we've seen in the winner-take-all aggregations, in the network, software networks, to a more equilibrious and more balanced, and I believe more sustainable manner. And that is, I believe, where they can truly make a big contribution.
Okay, great. You talked mostly about people-oriented ground transport. So obviously delivery vehicles, whether they're on the ground or in the air, as well as people on the ground or in the air. What about some of the other dimensions that you might have thought of or think about in terms of air transport, these air taxis and things that are autonomous vehicles? And what about autonomous vehicles on the ground? Is this in our future, in our near future or our middle term future? Where are we on all those things?
Well, I can tell you what happened if you just look back, what happened in the industry. So if you go back 10 years, there was very big hopes towards autonomous driving in the passenger car business. Right now, this has cooled down a little bit, but we see it still very strong in the logistics. So in the truck sector, it's still going strong. Actually, simply put, a truck is driving mostly straight. It doesn't have the challenges of a congested city. So autonomous or semi-autonomous, whether they come or not, I believe will not be decided by the technology. Coming back to my original statement, if you think of yourself as you're part of a city governing council, and then somebody comes and says, I'm going to unleash 1,000 autonomous cars on your roads. Now, what are you going to say? You're going to say, wait. You wait right here. You will talk to me first. And we will figure out some rules here. And we will figure out some mechanisms. And we will figure out some traffic control mechanisms where you plug into. And I basically guide you to some extent. And then we start discussing whether we permit these cars on the roads or not. And I believe that is ultimately the balance in urban mobility, which I also tried to present originally. It needs to be a public-private partnership, so the decision will be made by the policies, not by the technology.
Okay.
Yeah.
And where do you think? Oh, Philip.
Because I think that the whole subject is super interesting. I'm listening with a lot of big ears, but I think we're running slightly out of time. But maybe at the very end we can come back to this whole subject, because many things that Harry just mentioned I think are definitely worth to pursue in a discussion. But I think because we have an expert who can tell us a little bit more, and this is the subject of his talk, about the future. How is it seen in China, in particular in Shenzhen? And so I would suggest that we move on to Wolfgang before we go back at the very end, then to further questions to Harry Behrens and Michael Schumann, if okay. Thank you very much for this great presentation, Harry. Wolfgang, do you want to lead us to another country, to far away China? For those who didn't join from the very beginning, Wolfgang Hirn, he is a very famous, I have to say, China expert in Germany. He has a great newsletter. So if you haven't done so, subscribe to his German newsletter. He's also an author of a book about Shenzhen and the developments that are going on. And Wolfgang, please take us to China, and let's see if there is something we can learn from this big country, or in particular from Shenzhen, and to see how we can apply their knowledge to our problems and our challenges that we have in Europe.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. But first I have to say I'm not a technology expert, and I'm not a car industry expert. I studied economics and politics, and after that I went straight on into the business journalism, where I stayed for more than 40 years, 35 years with Manager magazine, which is based in Hamburg. And in summer 2019, I retired, and China was always my passion since I first visited the country in 1986. I did write several books about China, and the last one was titled Shenzhen, and was of course about Shenzhen, the neighboring city to Hong Kong. And why a book about Shenzhen? Because it is a relatively unknown Chinese city in the Western world, even in the business communities. But that is not fair to Shenzhen, because Shenzhen is a role model, a model city in many aspects. I will concentrate this short introduction to three aspects. Shenzhen first as an entrepreneurial, as a very innovative model. Second, Shenzhen as a smart city model. And third, Shenzhen as a model of city planning and transportation system. First, I want to talk about Shenzhen as the entrepreneurial model. And Shenzhen is a very young city. The average age is around 30. Young people from China and increasingly from all over the world are coming to Shenzhen. They have dreams and wishes which they want to realize in Shenzhen. It's a little bit like the early US, where people from all over the world came in this promising land. And why is Shenzhen so attractive for this kind of people? I think there are three reasons. First, because of the entrepreneurial spirit in the city. Since 1978, the beginning of the reforms in China, Shenzhen was a laboratory for reforms politically and economically. Second, the infrastructure for startups and entrepreneurs is unique in China. There you have all you need as a young entrepreneur. You have the accelerators, you have the incubators, you have a lot of co-working stations, you have maker spaces, you have the business angels, and you have a lot of venture capitalists in Shenzhen. And you have around Shenzhen all the necessary hardware to realize your ideas. And that's a big difference to the Silicon Valley in California, which is very software-based. In Shenzhen area, you have both software and hardware, a little bit exaggerated. You can have an idea in the morning, and in the afternoon, you get a prototype of this idea. And third reason why Shenzhen is so an innovative entrepreneurial city is that it's a very entrepreneurial friendly administration, which is supporting the community by easy access to residency permits and even financial incentives for housings. Second, why is Shenzhen a model? Shenzhen as a smart city role model. Many cities around the world are claiming to be a smart city, but Shenzhen is a smart city. And Shenzhen has a big advantage in this because two of the most advanced telecommunication companies are based in Shenzhen. The now world famous Huawei and its little competitor ZTE. No wonder that Shenzhen is the first city in China completely covered by 5G, which allows Shenzhen to become more and more a smart city which supervises the traffic, the air quality, the criminals, and even the garbage disposal by people in a commander room in front of one of the biggest screens in the world. Third point, while in my opinion, Shenzhen is a model city, this concerns the city planning and transportation system, and especially the electromobility. Shenzhen is the most advanced city concerning e-mobility. Since end of 2018, all 22,000 taxis are electric. Also, all 18,000 public buses and around 200,000 power stations are in the city. Why is Shenzhen so advanced in this sector? Since 2009, Shenzhen is a pilot city for e-mobility. Already in 2010, the first 30 e-taxis were on the streets in Shenzhen, and in September 2012, the first e-buses were in Shenzhen. And the city government has a clear strategy and is working together in realizing this strategy with private and state-owned companies. They are together building a so-called NEV union, New Electronic Vehicles Union. And how does this cooperation between the city government, the companies, state-owned and private are working? There is one big car company in Shenzhen, a little bit outside of Shenzhen, BYD, Build Your Dream. And this company is building all the cars and buses the city needs. And the city government gives incentives for the car buyers or the local taxi drivers or the bus operators. And third, state grid companies are building the power station network in the city. And the goal is that inside a circle of maximum of 850 meters, every car owner will find a power station. These were only three, but important aspects of innovative Shenzhen. I could tell you much more about the green city of Shenzhen, the innovative architecture of Shenzhen, and so on and so on. But one point I will still add, and that's very important for Shenzhen and the whole region around Shenzhen. The Chinese government is actively promoting the GBA, the Greater Bay Area. This area consists of Hong Kong and Macau, the two former colonies and now special administrative zones, plus nine cities in the neighboring Guangdong or Canton province. And Shenzhen is a very important part of this GBA, which has around 70 million people and will become one of the powerhouses of the world. And that's the end of my presentation. It was a very short presentation, but I'm open for answering the questions.
Great, thank you very, very much. A lot to chew on there. And I'm curious to know, you just mentioned the Greater Bay Area project. How do you think Shenzhen compares to, say, Guangzhou? Guangzhou sees itself as a kind of, I think, in competition with Shenzhen in some ways. So do you think that they can work together and make 1 + 1 = 3, or not?
I'm really convinced that they can work together. And this is a very, very interesting area. I think Hong Kong is losing, Shenzhen is winning, and also Guangzhou is winning, because every city in this Greater Bay Area has a competitive advantage. Shenzhen is the high-tech city. Hong Kong is still the financial capital in this area. Macau, okay, is the leisure city, and all the other cities around Shenzhen or between Shenzhen and Guangzhou are production sites. And I think this is a big advantage of this area. You have all different competitive advantages in an area which is like a small country in Europe or in the US. I'm really convinced this will be a powerhouse. This will be a powerhouse in the next 20, 30 years from now.
Okay. You mentioned one element of why you think Shenzhen is a hub of innovation and creation, and that is the role of the city government in supporting new technology and things. Are there any other reasons but that?
I think all started in Shenzhen or in this area. The whole reform process of China started in 1978, and one of the very interesting starting point was Shenzhen. And the main reason why Shenzhen is because it was near Hong Kong and it was near Taiwan. A lot of companies at that time moved from Taiwan and Shenzhen in Hong Kong to Shenzhen or the area around Shenzhen. And I think this was the main reason for the success of Shenzhen in the beginning, in the end of 70s and in the 80s.
Today, the Chinese Premier Li Keqiang had a press conference, and he talked a lot about innovation and what China needs, and he talked about China's next 5-year plan, which is very heavy on many aspects of technology. And while he didn't mention Shenzhen specifically, I'm curious to know what you think about the fact that China has been and is spending a lot of money on technology, and they've pledged now under this new 5-year plan to increase R&D spending by 7% a year. What do you think of that? And how do you think that Shenzhen will be a leader in advancing the technology under this 14th 5-year plan?
Yes, I think Shenzhen will be one of the leaders, but you know, this country is a very big country. There are a lot of places which has a lot of startups, and it's Hangzhou where Alibaba is based, or the area in Beijing around the 2 big universities, the Beida, Tsinghua, which is also a very innovative place. Not so Shanghai, because Shanghai is the place for the international companies, the big joint ventures. So I think the most innovative places are Shenzhen, Hangzhou, Beijing, or even in the western part, Chengdu. But Shenzhen, and this is very interesting, or it could be a little bit different from Beijing. The capital in Shenzhen is coming mostly from private people, from venture capitalists, from private companies, not so from the state or from. So I think this is a big difference, and there is a lot of money in Shenzhen. Sometimes I think there is too much money in Shenzhen. If you have an idea, it's no problem to get the money to realize the idea. Yeah.
Okay. I'm curious to know about the fact that China 2 years ago, according to the UN, has surpassed the US in the number of patents filed. And in the last year, in fact, China's lead over the US has grown. Do you have any opinions or anything to talk about there? And to what extent do you think that Shenzhen is driving a lot of that innovation?
There's a lot of critics in the Western world and saying, okay, that's not the quality of the quality of this. It's not like in the Western world. But if you look to Shenzhen, there are very innovative big companies. The first one is Huawei. I think it's #1 in patents in China or even the world. I'm not sure. But you can say, okay, the quality of these patents are not the same as in the Western world, but okay. And I think the other big company, which is very innovative, is Tencent. The big, how do you call it? It's online. It's so many it's invested in so many companies, but the most people know Tencent because of WeChat. And this is the most famous product of Tencent, and I think they are very, very innovative. But the problem of Shenzhen is that they have only 2 universities which started in the 80s and in the 90s, and I think this is an disadvantage of Shenzhen. Okay, there are the universities in Hong Kong which are much more better positioned than the universities in Shenzhen, and a lot of international universities have their campus in Shenzhen now, but this could be a little bit of a disadvantage for Shenzhen. They don't have this surrounding, this scientific surrounding.
The Huawei told me that they have filed 100,000 plus patents. I don't know over what the time period, but that's really impressive. And I think that they drove a lot of this growth in the number of patents that were filed by China and allowed them to, at the moment, leap over the US. So speaking of the US,
can I tell a little bit story about Huawei and the R&D center of Huawei, because this is very interesting. It's a little bit outside of Shenzhen in the north. There are 25,000 R&D people, and they have rebuilt some European cities, like university cities in this campus. It's Heidelberg, it's Bologna, it's Prague, it's Paris. If you come there, you think, how this is Europe. So it's a nice story to see that. Yeah.
Interesting. President Biden and Secretary of State Blinken have this idea that they want to put it politely, they want to compete with China and have a race to the top and not to the bottom. And so to what extent do you think that this, I call it coalition of the willing, will be able to stifle China's creativity and growth? So this is more of an EU level question in a way than a German question, but how do you see this interaction of competing and hopefully a race to the top and not the bottom? Do you see any positive aspects of that, or is it all negative?
I think we are still in a tech war. This is a tech war between the United States and China. And if you look to the telecommunications, you talked about Huawei and the other one is ZTE. Both are based in Shenzhen. These are one of the 2 leaders. The other 2 are in Europe, Nokia and Ericsson. And what's in the US? I think Biden has the right strategy to build this up in the US, but I think it takes a lot of money and a lot of time. And but if you look to, for example, artificial intelligence, I think it looks much better than in telecommunications. In this case, or in this field, in technology field, Europe is behind the US and China. A lot of people are talking, oh, this is only a race between China and the US in concerning artificial intelligence. I'm not an expert in this, but there are a lot of studies about this. You have to look.
Okay,
yeah,
please.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
You have to look at every technology.
Okay. And speaking of innovation and Europe, I have a question here for you from Carly Beely. Carly runs something called the China-Swiss Connect. And he's asking, should the West send their young people to Shenzhen to learn?
Yes, when I was, for writing my book, I lived for some months in Shenzhen in summer 2019. And I was surprised to see many young people from, not only from China, of course from China, but also many young people from all over the world went to Shenzhen and with their ideas and dreams and try to realize these ideas in this place in Shenzhen. And I think a lot of young people who are technology driven know how Shenzhen is, how innovative is Shenzhen. And I think there are a lot of people, young people who are coming and moving to Shenzhen, hopefully if it is still possible to go to China.
And Leopold's asking, he says, it doesn't make sense for Europe to copy Silicon Valley or Shenzhen. So what can people do in Europe to compete?
I think we can do, we can learn from Shenzhen, or we can learn from China, knowing that these are two different political systems. But as I told you, the policy concerning the e-mobility, that's not a question of political system. That's for me a question of political willingness to do that. And to cooperate between the government, the local government and the companies, or call it industrial policy or something like this, you can also do that in our Western countries. I know there's a lot of discussion about industrial policy. Is it in a market economy? Can we have an industrial policy? Especially in Germany, it is a very heavy discussion about this. But I think we need an industrial policy in various areas, in the car industry, in the battery industry, in many more industries. I think that's the point we can learn from China.
Okay, great. Philippe, it's 7:30. Do you want to go into some different mode?
My click, sorry, my mouse click didn't, the computer didn't take it. So I suggest, because we're running quite late, to maybe have one quick round of questions. So if there is someone from the audience who wants to ask a question to any of the three speakers, so this might be a good time to do so. But first of all, thank you very much for this very interesting talk, Wolfgang. It was very interesting to see how actually we can learn something from China. I think that's not really the mindset yet that we have in Europe, generally speaking, unfortunately. So I'm just looking, are there any questions from the audience to the other, to all the three speakers? Harvey, do you see anything?
No, but I have a suggestion, and that is, do any of the speakers want to comment on other speakers or raise questions? And I think it would be interesting to have a discussion amongst the experts, a short session. So does anybody, do any of the three of you experts have a comment or thought about the things that other people have discussed today?
I have a question to Harry. Do you study Shenzhen? the Shenzhen model? Do you look on Shenzhen or other places in Asia?
I've lived in Beijing for 4 years, but
Okay.
I have to admit I've never made it down to Shenzhen, which I'm very sorry about because I only heard good things about Shenzhen.
But you don't study this or as, look as a benchmark.
I do follow it, so I do know the Shenzhen model. Being a technologist, from a technologist angle, because a lot of things get done here, get done there, which are impressive. So from a technologist angle, I wouldn't say study it academically, but I am following it closely.
Okay.
And but I also believe that a little bit oppose your opinion with regards to Shanghai. Shanghai is not only the Bund, and Shanghai is not only the international companies.
Okay.
Shanghai has a very, very, very lively ecosystem. A lot of money in the positive sense, active, intelligent money is in Shanghai. And a lot of things revolve around Shanghai and Hangzhou. And they are essentially one area, if you wish.
Yeah.
You got the Bay Area. But if you look at Shanghai, you should probably include Suzhou, Hangzhou.
Yeah.
And then you have a very, very vibrant ecosystem there as well.
Okay, you are right. Yeah.
Michael, do you have anything to say or any comments about the other speakers and what they've discussed?
Yes. Well, I thought all the presentations were interesting and excellent, but I specifically would like to comment on some of the closing remarks you made when discussing Wolfgang's presentation. Should young people go over and study? I would say absolutely yes, but not only young people. I think everyone involved in transforming our notion, concepts, and habits of mobility should go to China and learn. Because if you recall, that is exactly what China has done over here, and what brought them to the current state of development. Besides many other factors, their own, industriousness and hardworking mentality and everything. But they took Europe, they took the US as a benchmark, and they not only send over their students. We ran a program with an organization that was called the State Administration of Foreign Expert Exchange, who would send us like 60 to 70 delegations every year, staying here for 2-week programs, analyzing mobility in Germany, for example, analyzing concepts of public transportation, analyzing concepts of innovation in urban transport. And these were, mayors, these were industry experts, these were academics, and they really were studying and working very, very hard. And I would advocate that we should, instead of creating this new kind of confrontational atmosphere and Cold War rhetoric, that we should just do the fucking same, like send our people over and study and create institutions that do those programs. In China, it's a state institution. The State Administration of Foreign Expert Affairs. We don't have any equivalent here in Germany. We don't have any equivalent in Europe. I'd say you don't have any equivalent to that administration in the United States. So study it, analyze it, replicate it, and do the same.
I think this would be a perfect ending word, but I just saw that Imi just opened up her video, but I just want to double stress the last sentence of Michael. I think we definitely, and that's actually the core mission of Silk Road 4.0, we need more learning from others, bring this knowledge to Europe and see how we can mutually on eye level leverage the global knowledge that we have at our fingertips. Imi, do you want to ask the last question?
Yes, I would like to. Thank you, Philippe, for the floor. Just a very brief one, actually, to all speakers, because you have very strongly overlapping topics. I would like to know, what is your opinion? How can we bring the awareness to the public and to also the businesses that it is actually needed to learn from China? Like, we know that we are a group of experts here and so on. We also talked bilaterally already about this topic, but I would like to know, what is your take on that? How can we bring this message out that it would make sense and we can learn a lot from China and that we should actually do it? Thank you very much.
Ooh.
Who wants to start with an answer?
I think we need other journalists.
You're biased.
Well, I tried to bring the topic to the media actually, but it was not really taken up.
Yeah.
It's I have the feeling it's not even the journalists. It's somehow the whole system. There are a lot of glass walls, maybe, for
But it
this
starts
topic.
with the journalists.
I believe it's a combination of different factors that are needed here. On the one hand, you need time. Change needs time. It might be a generational issue as well, because from what I experience is that a younger generation, startup generation, are much more open, are much more flexible to look at the Chinese example and to learn from it. Number one. Number two, we are still very much grounded in our old beliefs and in our, to some extent, Eurocentrist arrogance, let's put it this way. And in a therapeutical context, you would say that the pressure and Leidensdruck, I don't know how you translate that perfectly. It's not high enough. We're still much too comfortable. I believe that's going to change. People learn the hard way, and I wish it could be done easier. I hope that it could be done easier, but right now I don't see it. And I would agree with Wolfgang says. The public media. Convince it to paint a different picture about China. It's a very, very, very hard task at the moment.
Harry, do you want to say some last statement?
Thank you very much for your replies.
Okay. Harry, so I just wanted to give you the opportunity to add a last comment if you want. I know it's not a very technical question, so I don't want you to push you into it.
No, but what I believe is, we have an atmosphere right now where, out of reasons that are probably geostrategic, there's a general atmosphere that China is not, depicted in the positive way it should and it could be. And I believe, the best way to counter that is by making China accessible. I am married to a woman from Asia. I have been in China. The moment you go to China, you see how rich the culture is, how rich the life is, and how much of it is just different, but different in a beautiful way. That will basically make people interested. We just need to open channels that are beyond the political storyline, which is right now probably not in the most positive sense, but open it to a cultural, to a personal, and to an engagement level, and hope that will thaw it. Because I also believe there should be much more exchange. There's so much to learn. It's a whole cultural half world of its own, and there's truly immensely a lot to learn for both sides.
What a wonderful final statement. I'm just smiling internally. Before I hand over the last words to Harvey, I just want to say it's so interesting for me to see, because all the topics that every one of you was speaking about have a very personal story. So my last big trip that I did before COVID was actually to China, and in particular to Shenzhen. I was coordinating and organizing the Austrian pavilion on behalf of the Austrian embassy in Shenzhen at the China High Tech Fair. And Shanghai I know pretty well because I met this wonderful gentleman here, Harvey. I don't know if you remember, Harvey, the conference that we attended, actually one of the keynote speakers was the president of the Journalist Association of China. and you were kindly inviting me to join you for this conference back in, I think it was 2018 or so, when we met the first time. For those who don't know, Harvey was former vice president of ABC television in the United States. And he's also very knowledgeable about anything related to journalism. But Harvey, I would like to hand over the last words to you before we then move on to our Virbela environment, just to let you know. So the networking part continues for our VIP circle. So whoever wants and still have time and still has the energy, you can return to Virbela to do some networking and chit-chatting. But let's, Harvey, let's give you the pleasure, or us the pleasure, to hear your last words.
I thought all the speakers were very enlightening, and I learned a lot in a very short time today. And I know China pretty well. So I thank the speakers for that. And if I would have had one more question, it would have been, as democracies, are we advantaged or disadvantaged over China? Is China advantaged or disadvantaged over our form of government? It's something to think about. And maybe we can talk about that later or another time. But China is definitely a very dynamic country, and we could see it this week from all the news that came out of the National People's Congress and so on. And so I think our speakers today have given us a lot to think about. So thank you all, and thank the audience for some very good questions as well.
Lovely. Thank you for the closing remark, Harvey. It was a great pleasure. I'm looking forward to stay in touch with all of you, and yeah, keep yourself in the loop. Sign up for our newsletter. Follow us on a LinkedIn page so you can get the latest updates on when we travel or continue travels and what we'll learn about China. And yeah, a big thank you also for the team who made this evening possible. So Amy and Stefan, and also Professor Don Lewis, who was very actively asking questions and helping with the content preparation. I really appreciate all this hard work. It was really amazing. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful good evening. And hopefully I see a lot of you back in Virbela in our virtual reality environment.
Thank you for making this possible, Philip. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Philippe, for making this possible. Just wanted to say a big hand to Philippe, who is always like on the forefront of this emerging technology issue. Thank you very much.
Keep on traveling.
Excellent session. Thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.